Hi, I'm Lauren Hamilton, accountant for therapists. Today I want to talk about vehicles and cars and when you can take auto expenses and should you have a vehicle in your business name or do you have a personal car that you're using for business? So let's talk about all of those scenarios and situations and help you understand that a little bit more. Let's get into it. So, there are a lot of situations where, as a business owner, not necessarily just a therapist, but as a business owner, you may have some auto expenses that would be a legitimate business expense or deduction. And not all of those are gonna, apply to everyone's situation. But some of the most basic ones are gonna be for those that like mileage or gas, fuel, anything like that, that would pertain to travel. So let's say you have a conference that you're going to and you're driving your own personal car to the conference instead of, flying or anything like that. You can actually count those expenses. Like if you, fill up your car with gas, or if you have an EV car now and you use one of the public EV chargers to, again, get you to the, the place that you're ultimately going to wind up to. Those expenses can be used as travel expenses, auto expenses on your business income statement. So anything like that. Other things that you might be going to are maybe networking events, anything like that. Or maybe you do have like a meeting with your lawyer or attorney or anything like that, and you're actually driving to an actual business meeting of some sort. You can count the mileage for that. So let me also back up and say, what is business mileage? So what we're actually talking about is the actual miles that you are driving from your starting point to your ending spot. So let's say you're at your office and you are driving to, again, like a business meeting at another office. So you're starting at a business location and going to another business location. The amount of miles in between those two locations is the mileage that we are talking about. So that could be 20 miles, and let's say you have to drive there and back. So if it's 20 miles one way, that would be 40 miles total because you drive 20 there and 20 back. The IRS actually does issue a standard mileage rate every year. This year's rate for 2026 is 72 and a half cents. So if you did drive those 40 miles, you can times it by that 0.725, and that will give you the amount that you can claim as a business expense. So let's also talk about what is not considered business mileage. So if you have an office outside of your home and you commute, so you leave your home every day and go to your office, that commuting mileage is not business mileage. That is not considered business expense. What is considered business mileage, again, is if you start at your office location and then you drive to another business event. So whether that's a conference, whether that's a networking event, maybe you're meeting a client somewhere, or anything like that. So you're going somewhere to, again, have some sort of a business meeting, therapy session. Maybe you're doing group therapy somewhere. Maybe you're supervising somewhere, anything like that. So you're starting from your place of business to another business location. So as I mentioned, the commuting miles, like starting from your home to your place of work, does not count. However, if you do have a home office where you work from, full-time or pretty much full-time, that is the only exception of when you can start counting the mileage. So I myself work from home. So if I go and meet a client out for lunch or something like that, or go to their office for a meeting, I can count the miles from where my house is to where I'm meeting my client. And that would be the same for you as well. So if you have your home office where you're, regularly conducting business, you can count that for mileage. Just not if you have an office where you're conducting all of your business and it is outside of your home. Okay, so auto deductions as a whole, you can do this one of two ways. And this is one of those situations where once you pick a method, generally you're going to need to stay with that method, only because the name of the game in accounting is consistency. So if you pick one method one year and then do another method the next year and then kind of go back and forth, the IRS does not like that. So you'll want to pick a method that you feel like is something that might be good for your business now and in the foreseeable future. That's not to say that you couldn't ever switch it at some point, but again, it would have to be like kind of a one-time extreme circumstance sort of thing. So I just kind of want to put that up front before we kind of dive into these methods. So the first method is standard mileage method. And all that is what we were just talking about as far as mileage, is you're recording all of your business miles for the year and you're using the IRS rate, and that rate does change yearly. So for this year, for 2026, that rate is 72.5 cents. Again, you can Google that. You can just Google IRS mileage rate if you're not in 2026 right now watching this video. So the standard mileage rate method is taking your business miles and multiplying it with that IRS rate. So this is a very simple method. You don't have to track all the other auto expenses that, you might incur during the year, which we'll get into that with the next one. So the pros with this method is that it's simple. I mean, you can keep up with your miles during the year and use that formula for the year to calculate what that expense will be. And it's usually good for practices that have like low mileage during the year. So if you're somebody that is really not traveling a lot for your therapy practice, then this is probably the best method for you to use. So the second method is the actual expense method, and this gets more into the actual expenses that you're incurring for your vehicle. So how this works is you have a car that you own personally, and you are using that vehicle for business use, or some of the time. You're going to need to figure out what percentage of that vehicle is used for business travel. So for round numbers, let's say out of the entire year, 20% of the time I'm in my car is going to be for business travel. The other 80% is personal. So when you look at your expenses for that vehicle, so we're talking about gas, insurance, if you have any repairs and maintenance expenses for the year. If you lease the car, let's say you lease it or are making loan payments on it, you can use that as 20% of that as a business expense. And, registration, property taxes, all of that stuff. So anything that you are incurring expense-wise for that vehicle for the year, you can take 20% of those expenses as a business expense. This method would be best for somebody who does use their car quite a bit. So if you are a therapist who, maybe you go to schools a lot, or you meet your clients in like their location, or you travel, you're doing a lot of supervision or well, not webinars, but like conferences and like speaking engagements, things like that, where you do travel quite a bit for your practice. This might be a better method because you'll be able to take those actual expenses and use it for your business itself. So another item that comes up when we're talking about vehicles and businesses is, can a vehicle be owned by the business? And the answer to that is yes. However, as a practice owner, that vehicle would only be allowed to be used for business purposes. So most of the time, at least most of us, are going to have vehicles that we own personally, meaning that, we went to the car dealership or whoever you purchased it from, you paid your personal funds with it, your actual individual name is on the title, or, the car paperwork, insurance, all that good stuff. All of that is in your actual individual name. And so that's what we're talking about when we're using like business mileage or the actual direct expenses that you're paying for that car during the year. The other option that you do have is actually going and buying a car using your business name or your practice name. The only caveat with that is, if you're not somebody who is traveling a lot for your business, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have a vehicle in your business name. Usually we see that for people who are in trades like plumbers and construction workers, anything like that, where they actually have a vehicle that they use solely for business, like the vans and stuff like that, where they keep all of their supplies and everything with. That is something that would make sense to be in the business name, because you're not driving that vehicle around most of the time. I'm sure there's some instances, but for the most part, those vehicles are not out. Like, you don't take that on vacation. That is strictly for work, and it's left at the work location, and you get into another car and go home type of situation. So most of the time, businesses that are not set up that way may not need an actual business car. There are a lot of things out there on the internet that, talk about how that's a good business deduction. And while it is, it only makes sense for the businesses that actually need a vehicle. Because again, if you are a therapist that travels, like maybe you work literally from your car, where you're going from school to school, or you meet your clients everywhere. Maybe you're traveling because you go to universities to do speaking engagements or something like that. If that is a situation that you are in, then it may make sense to have a vehicle in your business name. However, for the majority of therapists, it's not going to make sense to have a vehicle in your business name. Another item to keep in mind if your vehicle is in the business name, anytime you're using that vehicle for personal use will have to be noted as income to you. So it's the exact opposite of what we were talking about earlier. So if you have a personal vehicle that you are using for business travel, those expenses can be deducted on your business side. Whereas the opposite is if the vehicle is in the business name and you're using it for personal travel or personal use, then that percentage of the time that it's used, you would need to calculate as income to you personally, because you are using a business asset personally. So just to keep that in mind, again, the IRS wants to make sure that there's a clear definition between what is personal use and what is business use, no matter if it is in your personal name or the business name. So just some kind of ending thoughts and tips. For business travel, there are mileage apps that you can put on your phone to help you track the mileage. So again, if you're somebody who does go to clients a lot or meets for universities, or, you're giving speeches or supervising visits, anything like that, if you're doing a lot of that, it might make sense to download a mileage tracking app. There's a ton of them out there. You can just find one that works best for you. Another thing might be just to keep a piece of paper in your car, write it down, or even in your notes app, depending on where you are technology wise. You can also set reminders in your phone if you want to track what your odometer says at the beginning of the month versus the end of the month, and then make sure you can calculate the miles kind of backwards. That's a little bit harder to do, but it is another method of keeping up with it if that works for you. The other thing is just keeping up with receipts. So if you use the actual expense method for calculating those auto expenses, just keep your receipts of things, especially if you have your car serviced, or, oil changes, tire rotations, anything like that. Just keep record of all of that, so that way when it does come time to prepare your taxes, your tax preparer will have all of that to make sure that all of those expenses are legitimate. So overall, again, auto expenses can be kind of complicated, but once you pick a method of how you're going to calculate those for the year, you'll just want to stay consistent with it. So whether that is the standard mileage method or the actual expense method, you'll just keep up with that during the year. Again, that's something that you'll want to probably do quarterly instead of annually, because if you do it quarterly and you're working on your quarterly estimates, that's something that's going to go into lowering your tax liability. So again, if you don't have those in there quarterly, then you could be making a higher estimated tax payment than what you really need to. So just keeping that in mind. If you have any other specific questions about auto deductions and expenses, I would love to know what those are so that I can support you better there. And if you found this video helpful, please like and share it with somebody who might also find it helpful. We always like to support our fellow therapists. Until next time, be well.